She was the last choice in town, but the only one brave enough to face his truth. She wasn't anyone's first choice. She knew that. She had known it for a long time. The way you know something that nobody says out loud, but that sits in the air around you every time you walk into a room. The way people's eyes move past you just a little too fast. The way invitations arrive late, if they arrive at all. The way a woman learns to take up less space, make less noise, want less, because wanting things and not getting them is its own kind of slow damage. She had learned all of that by the time she was 25. By 30, she had made a kind of peace with it. And then the man on the hill lost his mind, and every woman in Grady Falls had something to say about it, and not one of them was willing to do a single thing to help. Every woman except her. Stay with me tonight, because this story is going to take you somewhere you might not expect. It starts with a woman nobody wanted and a man everybody given up on, and it ends somewhere so warm and quiet and real that you might just need a minute at the end to sit with it. If you love slow, emotional Western romance stories like this one, go ahead and subscribe right now. We put out a brand new story every single week, and we never want you to miss one. And drop a comment below before you go. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. Tell me if you ever felt like the last choice in a room full of people. I read every word you write. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Her name was Nora Sells, and she was 32 years old, unmarried, and employed as the bookkeeper for the general store in Grady Falls, Wyoming, a town small enough that everyone knew your name and large enough that they could still manage to overlook you. She was not plain, though people described her that way sometimes. The way people use plain to mean quiet or careful or not trying to be noticed. She had red hair she kept pinned back and green eyes that missed very little, and hands that were always busy, because idle hands in Nora's experience had a way of finding old grief to turn over. She had been engaged once. His name was Daniel Pruitt, and he had chosen someone else 8 days before the wedding. Someone softer, someone prettier in a way that people pointed to, and he had told Nora, with genuine apology that somehow made it worse, that he just felt more sure about the other girl. That was the word he used. Sure, like Nora was a question he had decided not to answer. She had gone back to work the next morning. She had not cried in public. She had not asked for sympathy. She had simply kept going, because stopping was not a thing she knew how to do. That was 4 years before the story I'm telling you now. The man on the hill was named Caleb Moss. He had come to Grady Falls about 3 years back with a deed to 40 acres of hill land north of town, a reputation that arrived slightly before he did, and a silence about him so complete that the town had filled it in themselves with whatever made the most sense to them. He had been a soldier. That much was known. He had come back from somewhere that people named in low voices, not because it was secret, but because the naming of it seemed to cost something. He had built a house on his 40 acres mostly by himself, bought a small herd, hired nobody, and come into town only when he needed supplies, which he paid for in cash, accepted no conversation about, and left immediately after. He was 36. He was tall in a way that made rooms feel smaller. He had a scar that ran along the left side of his jaw that people stared at when they thought he wasn't looking. He was not unkind. He was just unreachable, like a door that didn't have a handle on the outside. What the town knew and whispered about and had mostly decided was permanent was this: Caleb Moss had spells. That was the word they used. Spells. Like it was something quaint, something manageable, something you could wait out like weather. But the people who had been near him, when one came on knew it was nothing like that. It was a shaking that started in his hands. It was a look that came into his eyes like he had gone somewhere else entirely. Somewhere dark and loud, and not here, and didn't know how to find his way back. It was the time he had been in the feed store, and a barrel had fallen from a shelf, and the sound had sent him down to the floor with his arms over his head. And when he came back to himself, there were 12 people standing around him, and not one of them had moved to help. After that, he came into town even less. After that, the town talked even more. The women his age and thereabouts had made a quiet agreement, the way communities sometimes do without ever saying it plainly, that Caleb Moss was not a man you got involved with, that his land was not worth the trouble of his mind, that whatever had happened to him over there had taken too much and left too little, and a sensible woman made sensible choices. 3 of them had been approached on his behalf by the pastor, who had taken it upon himself to find Caleb some help whether Caleb wanted it or not. 3 of them had declined. 2 of them very gently. 1 of them not gently at all. The pastor, whose name was Harold Webb, and who had the particular stubbornness of a man who believed that every problem had a solution if you just kept looking, came to Nora on a Tuesday. She was at her desk in the back of the general store, tallying a column of figures that refused to balance, and he sat down across from her with his hat in his hands and that particular look on his face that meant he was about to ask for something uncomfortable. She put down her pencil. She waited. He told her about Caleb. She knew most of it. Everyone did. He told her the situation had gotten worse, that a neighbor had ridden up to check on him 2 weeks back and found him sitting in the yard in the cold with no coat on, just sitting there staring at something only he could see. And the neighbor hadn't known what to do and had eventually just left, because what do you do with something you don't understand? He said Caleb's supplies were running low and he wasn't coming into town to replace them. He said the herd was not being tended the way it needed to be. He said that if someone didn't go up there and help that man get himself organized, the whole situation was going to collapse in a way that would be very hard to come back from. He said he needed someone to go out to the Moss place, just to check in, just to see what was needed, just to be another human presence for a man who had been alone too long with whatever was living inside his head. Nora looked at him for a long moment. "I'm your 4th choice," she said. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Nora, it's all right," she said. "I'm not offended. I'm just establishing the facts." She picked up her pencil. She put it down again. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" He said he thought if she could go up a few times a week, help with the books for the ranch, make sure he was eating, make sure things weren't deteriorating further, it would help. He said Caleb had agreed to it, reluctantly, which for Caleb Moss apparently meant he had stared at the pastor for a long time without saying no. Nora thought about Daniel Pruitt and the word sure. She thought about being the last choice. She thought about the man sitting in the yard in the cold with no coat, staring at something nobody else could see. "I'll go Thursday," she said, and picked her pencil back up. She drove out on Thursday morning in the buckboard she borrowed from her employer, with a box of supplies in the back that she had paid for herself, and a very clear plan in her mind to be practical and helpful and not to make anything into more than it was. The house on the hill was plain and solid, and looked like something a man had built who cared more about it standing than about it looking like it was standing. There was a porch that faced south. There was a barn behind it that was in better condition than the house, which told her something about where his priorities lived. There was a lean-to on the east side full of neatly stacked wood, which told her something else. She knocked on the door. He answered it after a long enough pause that she had time to wonder if he would. He was as tall as she had expected, and quieter than she had expected, which was saying something. He looked at her without hostility, without welcome, without much of anything except a kind of braced stillness, like a man waiting to be disappointed in a particular way. "Mr. Moss," she said, "I'm Nora Sells. Pastor Webb asked me to come." "I know who you are," he said. That surprised her a little. She didn't know how he knew her, given that he barely came into town. "I've seen you at the store," he said, reading her face. "You notice everything." She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a caution. She decided to treat it as neither and simply held out the box. "I brought supplies, and I'll need to see your records if you have any, so I can understand the state of things." He stepped back from the door. She went in. The inside of the house was clean in a way that a place is clean when the person in it has too much time and not enough to fill it with. Everything in its place. Nothing extra. A table, 2 chairs, a shelf of books that surprised her, a fireplace that was cold, and a window facing west that had a clear view all the way to the ridge. He had records. They were not in terrible shape, which told her he was more functional than the town believed, at least in the practical ways. She sat at his table and went through them and asked questions when she needed to, and he answered them without elaboration and without warmth, and she found that she didn't mind that. She was used to doing without warmth. She came back on Monday, and Thursday again, and then Monday after that. The first time she saw a spell come on, she was in the kitchen making coffee while he was outside, and then she heard a sound, not quite a sound, more of an absence of the usual sounds, and she looked out the window and saw him standing at the fence with both hands gripping the top rail, and his head bowed, and his shoulders pulled up a way that looked like a man trying to hold himself together through the force of will alone. She put the coffee down. She went outside. She walked to the fence and stood beside him, and she did not say anything, and she did not touch him, and she did not look at his face. She just stood there. He was breathing hard. His knuckles on the rail were white. She waited. After a while, the breathing slowed. After a while, the shoulders came down. After a while, he was just a man standing at a fence looking at a field. He said, without looking at her, "You should go back inside." "The coffee's almost ready," she said. He was quiet. "You take it, Black," she said. "I already know." She went back inside. After a few minutes, he followed. They drank their coffee at the table and didn't talk about what had happened. She talked about a discrepancy she had found in the ranch records from 6 months back. He talked about a problem with the south pasture drainage. They were practical and quiet, and somewhere in the middle of it, something small but significant moved between them, like a door opening just slightly on a room neither of them had expected to find. She did not tell the town what she saw up there, not the spells, not the books on his shelf, which turned out to be poetry and history, and a worn Bible with notations in the margins in small, careful handwriting, not the way he had, on her fourth visit, put a second chair on the porch without mentioning it, just placed it there so it would be there. The town had opinions, anyway. A woman named Bethel Crane, who had declined to help and felt the need to explain why to as many people as would listen, told Nora over the dry goods counter one afternoon that she was being foolish, that Caleb Moss was damaged beyond fixing, that a woman like Nora, and she said it in that particular way, a woman like Nora ought to be grateful for the chance at a practical arrangement, even if it came with complications. Nora looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "A woman like me tends to make up her own mind," and picked up her package and left. She thought about it on the drive home, not what Bethel said, what she herself felt. She was not foolish enough to think she understood everything that was happening inside Caleb Moss. She was not romantic enough to believe that presence alone could fix what war had broken. But she had spent 4 years being the woman nobody chose, the woman who was passed over, the question left unanswered, and she knew what it looked like when someone was disappearing. She had felt the early edges of it herself in the year after Daniel had gone. She recognized what was happening to Caleb Moss because she had been in the anteroom of it herself, and she had found her way back through work and stubbornness, and a refusal to let herself stop. She thought maybe he could too. She just needed him to believe it was possible. It was a Wednesday in October when she finally asked him the thing she had been circling for weeks. They were on the porch, the second chair. The sky was doing something dramatic with the light, the way Wyoming skies do in autumn. She had her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, and she said, without preamble, because she had never learned to approach things inside, what happens inside them, the spells. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I go back." She waited. "There was a valley," he said. "We lost men in it. Not fast. It went on for 3 days, and there was nothing to do but hold the position and watch, and the sounds were—" He stopped. He looked at his hands. "The sounds didn't leave when I came home." Nora looked at the ridge. "I hear things sometimes," he said. "Sounds that are here, that are normal, and they become those sounds. And I can't." He stopped again. "I can't locate myself. I can't find where I am." She thought about that for a moment. "What brings you back?" she said. He was quiet. Then he said, "Cold air sometimes. The feel of something solid." He paused. "Lately, your voice." She looked at him. He was looking at the ridge, jaw tight, like a man who had said too much and was not sure what to do about it. She looked back at the ridge, too. "That's why I don't go inside," she said, understanding it now. "When it happens, that's why I just stay close." "Yes," he said. "All right," she said. And that was all. And it was enough. The crisis came in November, in the form of a letter from a land company in Cheyenne that had decided Caleb's 40 acres sat in a very convenient location for their expansion and was offering him a price that was technically fair and practically an eviction, with a deadline of 60 days and language and contract that implied they had resources he didn't. She found him sitting with the letter at the table, and she read it over his shoulder, and then she sat down across from him and said, "Have you responded?" "Not yet." "Good. Don't. Not until we talk to someone who knows contract law." He looked at her. "We." She met his eyes. "Yes," she said. "We." He looked at the letter. He looked at her. Something in his face, that braced stillness, that waiting for disappointment, shifted very slightly. "All right," he said. She drove to town the next morning, saw the attorney who handled property disputes in the county, came back with 3 pages of notes, and sat down with Caleb and went through every word of it. The land company's contract had a clause that didn't hold up against his original deed. She had the attorney write a letter. She made sure Caleb signed it. She mailed it herself. The land company did not write back. The 40 acres stayed his. He didn't say thank you the way most people say thank you. He went quiet in a particular way that she was learning to read. Then the next Monday when she arrived, there was a wooden box on the porch table, small and carefully made, with her initials carved into the lid, NS, in letters that were more skilled than she would have expected. She picked it up. She looked at him. "For your pencils," he said. "You're always looking for them." She pressed her lips together so she wouldn't do something she hadn't decided to do yet. "Thank you, Caleb," she said. He nodded and went inside. She stood on the porch and held the box for a moment and allowed herself, quietly, privately, to feel something she had been very careful with. It was December when he said it. A cold, clear evening. Stars already out by 5 o'clock, both of them on the porch, because they had started to prefer the cold to missing the sky. He said, "I know why Webb sent you. I know I was the last thing on the list." She didn't deny it. "I know what they say in town," he said, "that I'm too far gone, that whatever came back from that valley isn't worth the effort. People say a lot of things when they're afraid of what they don't understand," she said. "You weren't afraid." "I was a little afraid," she said honestly. "The first day, but not of you." He looked at her. "I was afraid of doing it wrong," she said. "Of coming up here and making things worse instead of better. That kind of afraid." He nodded slowly. "Nora," he said, and the way he said her name was like the way he did most things, careful, deliberate, like something he decided to mean. "Yes," she said. "I would like you to stay," he said. "Not just on Mondays and Thursdays." He looked at the stars. "I would like you to stay." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the word sure. She thought about Daniel Pruitt and the wedding that didn't happen, and the 4 years of being passed over, and the woman at the dry goods countersaying a woman like Nora. She thought about a man who carved her initials into a box of wood with his own hands, because she was always losing her pencils. She thought about standing at a fence saying nothing and it being exactly the right thing. "I'll have to go back for my things," she said. He looked at her. The brace was gone. For the first time since she had known him, that waiting for disappointment look was simply gone. "I'll drive you," he said. She almost smiled. "I know the way." "I know you do," he said. "I'd like to drive you anyway." And she let him. They were married in February at the house on the hill, with Pastor Webb officiating and the wind coming hard off the ridge the way it always did, and Nora in her good blue dress with her red hair down for once, and Caleb in a clean shirt with his hands steady and his eyes on her face from the moment she walked out the door. He said his vows like a man who had chosen every word carefully and meant all of them. She said hers clearly, without trembling, without looking away. The spells did not disappear. That is not how it works, and she knew that, and so did he. But they had language to them now, and a porch and 2 chairs, and a woman who knew to stand close without making it into something that needed explaining. They had the 60-day letters that didn't come back, and the pencil box with her initials, and the poetry books with the careful handwriting and margins that she had started reading in the evenings while he tended the fire. They had something that had been built slowly and honestly between 2 people who had both been told, in different ways and by different voices, that they were not quite worth the effort. They had decided, together, to disagree. In the spring, Pastor Webb came up the hill for Sunday coffee, which had become a habit now that the hill felt less closed off, and he sat on the porch and looked out the pasture, which was green and properly tended, and then he looked at Nora and said, "I want you to know you were not my last choice." She raised an eyebrow at him. "You were the only choice," he said. "I just had to do things in the right order." Caleb, from his chair, said nothing, but his hand found Nora's on the armrest between them and stayed there. She looked out at the field, at the 40 acres, at the south pasture drainage that was finally sorted, at the sky that was doing that enormous Wyoming thing with the light. She was the last choice in town. She was also exactly brave enough. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. If this story found you tonight, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me which moment stayed with you. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever been underestimated by people who didn't look close enough. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. We have so many more stories waiting for you. Stories about women who were overlooked and men who needed finding in love that came in quietly through the back door when no one was expecting it. We'll see you in the next one.